Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome one and all to the Defiant Takes Football Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at @TheMaxDean. Today I'm joined by Nick Merriam, our Director of Draft Content. Nick, how you doing today?
Doing well, rocking the Commanders gear. Finally got some, so, good.
Yeah, people make fun of me for wearing Jet stuff around. They're like, I live in Texas, and they're like, really? Really? This is a better year, but still. And of course, we have our producer, Noah Ashley, helping us out as well. How you doing today, Noah?
Yeah, doing well, guys. How you guys doing?
Excellent. This is a fun show because we get to talk about a lot of different things that go into the NFL team building process. First of all, we're going to do our post-mortem for our wildcard teams that were kicked out this past weekend. So we're going to go over those, talk about why they fell short. We're not going to do post-mortems for anybody who made it to the divisional round and on because they're kind of right there. I think you could honestly say that any one of these teams has a real shot to make it to the conference championship and beyond. And, it's not going to be long before we start our previews for each team's offseason as well. So this will be the last time we do this year. But after we do that, the second half of the show is going to be the head coaching and coordinator cycle. So we're going to talk about which teams are looking at which guys. We've already had one hire on the defensive coordinator front, which I even missed. But so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about who's in the running. We might not hit every single candidate, I know, but that's a lot of people to talk about. But that's the plan for today. So, Noah, I think you might be leaving us pretty soon. Just want to say appreciate everything you do, helping us get done pretty much on time today. We were able to do way more today and be much closer to being on time. All right. So I think this is the first thing. I mean, is there anything that you want to preface today's show with, Nick, before we jump right into our postmortems?
I mean, not anything off the top of my head. I always have things about my own team that I could bring up, but I don't think people really care. So we're gonna let's just hop into it. Let's do the
all right. Well, we'll talk Commanders soon enough. So, okay. So let's do that real quick. Hit this. All right. And, for anybody out there who wonders why these depth charts look a little weird, like the 5th, 6th, 7th, or whatever, I pull them straight from the team websites. So, honestly, I just don't have time to input every single player into a depth chart. So I just copy paste. So if it looks weird, talk to the team. All right. So the Seattle Seahawks, they started the season strong. A lot of excellent contributions from their draft class, from their rookies. They wavered a little bit, but they were able to close out the season and get a couple wins, make it into the playoffs. And then, even though I would say they were probably not the worst team in the playoffs, at least that weekend, and just based on injuries and everything, they definitely took the hardest shellacking, and the 49ers steamrolled them and sent them home. So right now, this is a team that's pretty young, also has some stars, also surprisingly found their quarterback. But what do you think will take them to the next level? What do you think will get them to be more competitive in the Super Bowl? Where did they fall short?
Well, I will say I do think Tampa got shellacked a little harder. Maybe we should recap that game when we're done with the post-mortems because we didn't.
Yeah, that's actually pretty fair. Yeah, that's pretty fair. Okay.
All right. Well, we'll get through these teams really quick, but yeah. Well, actually, you know what? We're going to talk about the Bucs when we do our post-mortem, so we'll talk about the game now with that.
Yeah.
So that works out. Yeah. So the Seahawks' real issue is just that they didn't expect to win this year. This is kind of a surprise, and it's really the quarterback position developing well for them, kind of out of nowhere. And it's exciting stuff for them because now you kind of get to operate differently if you really think Geno Smith is a guy going forward. So I believe is probably firmly in that Cousins tier and maybe could get you some Dak or Matt Stafford level play if you're looking for it at certain points. I mean, obviously the streak of play we saw from earlier this season was about as high as any quarterback was playing in terms of production efficiency at any point in the season. So he's capable of it. He definitely dipped a little bit late in the season, but I think his last game here against the Niners he actually played quite well. I know he had one turnover, an interception late in the game that wasn't as good, but I think he was a big part of the reason why they stuck around in that game against San Francisco. Made a great throw to DK Metcalf, gave his number one target multiple chances to make plays, whether they were made or not. But he's the guy going for it. You have to find a way to lock him up long term. And I would even think Geno's not super old. He's not he's not a young spry player at this point. He's 32, but he's young enough that you can pay him for 3 or 4 years and expect to get some pretty good production until we start looking for quarterbacks again, I would think. And you just feel good about him because he's been in the organization for a while. They like him. He seems to work with the locker room and the team. It's weird. Like, it's hard to really have imagined this preseason, but I have a hard time seeing Geno not being at least a solid option at quarterback going forward. For usually you have this type of, come out of nowhere type season from a career backup, and you kind of have questions still going into year 2, but I feel pretty good about him going forwards. It's just the rest of the roster was kind of lacking, and we knew that going in, and they added a lot of talent in the draft, but because you were good, you kind of get to look at your draft capital now as a way to just, reinvest in a roster that needs more players, and they can do that, and then they'll see if they get better if they hit on a couple picks.
Yeah, I think my copy paste here chopped off the running back group, but one thing that stands out to me here is kind of a lack of depth. When you move past DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett at receiver, who did they have there? They had guys like Derek Young, you know what I mean? Laquan Treadwell. I know injuries played a little bit of a part in that, but it's like, if you imagine if for whatever reason DK Metcalf had to miss the second half of that playoff game, it would have been far more ugly even than it was, because they were able to get quite a lot out of him. And it's easy to say, yeah, what if a star player went missing for any team? But still, that is probably a group that needs an infusion of youth and depth. So they have a bunch of picks, but I think that's something they need to pay attention to.
What's tough with that is they spent a high pick on Dwayne Eskridge, who I never thought was as high of a prospect as a lot of people tend him to be. And he and Marquise Goodwin kind of flipped back and forth between their third receiver. They played a lot of 12 personnel this year, and it worked for them. But you're absolutely right. They kind of need to go back to the well there. And I don't know, that Eskridge pick is still something to me that kind of was questionable and remains so.
Yeah, 100%. And the offensive line could still use some work as well. I mean, I think based on, it's been said many times in many places that progression is not necessarily linear. Development is not linear for NFL players. So you can't always just make an assumption that a player will be better. But I think, there is at least some level of expectation that guys like Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, who played as rookies and flashed definitely at times, will probably get a little bit more consistent, will probably continue to develop a little bit, be a little better in the second year. And then the interior of the offensive line, I think they could probably use something there as well. They've got cap space, so they definitely can work with it. The Geno Smith contract is definitely going to be something to consider. The only reason that it really is a cap consideration at this point is because they might have to use the franchise tag. And if you do, the full tag hits the cap until you work out an extension. So you have to have that flexibility. If they work out an extension before the official start of free agency, then you don't have to worry about that. And they have plenty of flexibility in terms of signing other players, adding more depth to the roster. They have 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks. A first and second are both relatively high as well. So they have a lot of opportunities to continue to add to this roster. And defensively, as we look, I think it was more than clear that they need a pass rush. I think the edge rush is a big part of it. If they were able to land Jalen Carter, I would be fine with that too. But some kind of big-time pass rush, I think, would be key for them, because with a player like Tariq Woolen on the outside and then the safety play that they have, if you can generate more pass rush, those players will become like force multipliers. You know what I mean? I think, especially with the way that Tariq can pick off the ball. So I think that's kind of where that they need to get better. But again, so much opportunity to do so.
Yeah. Sorry, I just got distracted by some breaking news a little bit here. It's not really big breaking news, but Ryan Kerrigan's been announced as a defensive line coach at the Senior Bowl.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is cool because he got to coach the DL in Washington this year. They kind of brought him on late, and that was a late addition, and he's moving his way up. But yeah, this is a roster that, on the defensive side, I think they got a lot more out of what it looks like on paper. Schematically, they're a bit different. They run a 3-4 that's more of the college 3-4 almost. Like they run like 4-eye, 0-4-eye. And they kind of use their outside linebacker types less as like common edge players and more as like actual linebackers. And I think losing Boya Mafe, who was giving them kind of the third down pass rush, hurt them a little bit defensively. They got some production out of an older Bruce Irvin and Darrell Taylor, but they need an infusion on that D-line for sure. Tariq Woolen being an absolute slam dunk pick in the 5th round really saved this defense, I think, from looking more of a disaster than it was.
Yeah, for sure. I think the cracks in their defense showed at times. They were able to create some big plays, and I think you saw some issues when they went to Germany. I think that was a big one, a big game for their defense. But I mean, I don't know what else to say about this team. They have a lot of the requisite pieces. They have playmakers. They have a quarterback. They have some young defensive talent, and they just need a little bit more of all of it. They just need a little bit more pass rush, a little bit more development, and a little bit more depth. I think Kenneth Walker coming on after he returned from his injury I can't remember if he was injured in the preseason or was he hurt throughout some of the draft cycle and it just lingered. I don't remember, but might have been preseason. But once he came back, he was huge for them. Probably going to be one of the better runners in the NFL for a good 4 or 5 year stretch here, which is fantastic too. So that does take some of the pressure off of the receivers, but still, I just think if there's anything that we've learned about this. If there's anything that we've learned about the NFL over the past few years is that you need playmakers, and you can't really operate effectively if your top one goes down. So just the more, the merrier. Any final comments on the Seahawks before we get to our next team here?
Yeah, just that it's like this team is showing why I think trading for future picks is so valuable in today's league. I know people always go, "Oh, picks are lottery picks," and I think a lot of people undervalue them. Even mid-round picks, I think, have more value than people give them. But when you trade for these first-round selections, often you're like expecting that the player you're giving the team is going to make those picks high. So your expectation of a floor is like, "Oh, we're going to have a pick somewhere in the 20s," and you're okay with that. The thing about that is the downside of that is somehow it ends up being pick 32. Like that's the worst case scenario. And then the best case scenario is what happened with Denver, where they just had a collapse and now you're picking top 5. So it's just a very easy way to give yourself a high end of outcomes. And I just think more teams that are trying to get better should consider trying to add that draft capital, because it's your high end. The way you look at high end for quarterbacks to make your roster better, I think that exists with first round picks as well.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you. And I mean, a lot of the teams that we talk about who have made market improvements or outperformed expectations have done that, have made an effort to do that. Seahawks, Jets, even the Eagles, I think people were high on them, but I don't think anybody expected quite this out of them. It was their ability to add additional picks in the future, which turned out to be higher than expected. And whether they were drafting players or able to turn that into a veteran player like A.J. Brown, once you have the capital, you can do whatever you want with it. But I think trying to set yourself up in the future in that way is unless you have so many pieces and there's age considerations for some of the most important ones, then I think that's something that we should definitely be promoting. All right. Next up, let's go to the Los Angeles Chargers. All right. So the Chargers, a little bit of a different situation. They have their full allotment of draft picks, but they're also scheduled to be $20 million over the salary cap. This is a team that they dealt with injuries early and often. And, you could chalk up a little bit of their early to mid-season floundering to those injuries, but at the same time, that's probably a little bit of an oversimplification. There were major things going wrong there schematically on the offense. They weren't looking really good. And, we saw the OC get released after the season as a result of that. They got a bunch of the guys back. They never got Rashawn Slater back to close out the season. And they had the all-time meltdown in the playoffs as well. So based on what they have right now, you probably can talk yourself into this being a pretty solid roster next year. But then the question is, how do they approach this roster that's currently assembled? Do they have to let guys go to get under the cap? I mean, are they going to double down? They're not really an organization who traditionally spends a whole bunch of money. So being $20 million over the cap for them seems more likely to inspire some releases than it does seem to inspire, restructuring contracts and pushing money down the line, because you still got to spend it today, even if it doesn't hit the cap today.
Yeah, and I think that we talked about this in the last show, like with an older Keenan Allen and Mike Williams being as injured as he's been, they seem like prime cut candidates for this team to free up all that space. I'm pretty certain that gets them back to positive money if they do that, but I haven't checked on that. I'd have to go back and look, but they're certainly going to be shedding some of these larger contracts to try and get back above the cap. And then, it's going to be probably some cheap ads and then try and add to the draft. And I think the big thing for this team, and I was, pounding the table last offseason for them, was I thought they needed to fire Joe Lombardi, and they've done that now. That offense was very reliant on Justin Herbert's ability to go through effectively complex progressions and then consistently dink and dunk his way up the field, which just compared to like Daniel Jones of the Giants right now, he's doing that, but the Giants do a much better job of using rub routes, scheming up guys to get open to make that easy for him. And then they also don't really ask him to go beyond a second read. They say run. Herbert isn't a guy that, although he can run, you really want to run because he's so good at throwing the ball, So they've kind of just had this run extension of the offense that ends up just being their short passing game. And it's been ugly at times because when you play a game like against Jacksonville, you don't have the run game. You don't have the over-the-top ability to just blow the game wide open the way Buffalo does. So you're trying to ice away the clock by completing passes over and over again. And it is not sustainable at all. So I'm very interested to see who they hired offensive coordinator. There's a very good chance that whoever they bring in really changes the way this team looks. And I think that they should double down on offense and they should just try and fill out, their weapons group, the offensive line. I think they should just try to score a ton of points next year because quite honestly, the defense isn't great. But schematically, they've done a good job to not be a disaster, at least against the passing game. They can get run on. We've seen that. But if you have a good enough offense and you can get leads early, this is a team that we've seen can compete with the likes of Kansas City. So they really need to show this offseason that they are invested in Justin Herbert as their quarterback long-term. He is clearly – I think he's better than Phillip Rivers. Like, I think he is the best quarterback this franchise has probably had since Dan Fouts. You've got to double down on his investment, making sure that he can play as well as he can for you.
The other consideration is that he's going to warrant a pretty large contract in the near future too. And maybe they even want to jump on that now because the longer you wait, the higher that price tag is going to go because somebody's going to pay Lamar Jackson, I imagine, this season. The Bengals are probably going to pay Joe Burrow. Those two players alone are going to make a notable difference. Now, did you say earlier Keenan Allen and Mike Williams as the potential cut candidates?
I believe so. I don't know. Okay. I know Williams had a shorter deal.
So as it stands right now, Keenan Allen would save them $14.8 million against the cap if he were released. So pretty notable. They get closer. He's been hurt. He's a very good player. I'm not sure he warrants the $20 million anymore, though. Mike Williams, he won't help you at all to let him go. They'd lose money against the cap if they released him prior to June 1. They could do a post-June 1st cut if they wanted to, but that doesn't actually save them any cap space. It just would save them cash. So
looks like post-June 1st they could trade him.
But it wouldn't save him any money because he only has 1.5 million in guaranteed salary anyway. So the reality is that doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. They could trade him at any point, probably if they really wanted to. But Mike Williams is probably a guy that you stick around because otherwise you're just totally devastating
Fair enough.
the entire pass catching unit. But if you move on from Keenan Allen, you can also add a rookie or something like that and have a little bit of both sides.
Mm-hmm.
But where I think they're most likely going to be moving on is Khalil Mack.
Mm-hmm.
Khalil Mack saves him $18.4 million against the cap, and I don't think he had a season that's worthy because he's scheduled to earn $23 million this year. So I'm going to go ahead and say that's not going to happen. And he'll probably be a free agent because I don't think anybody else is going to take on that contract either. So they can get over the cap, but it well could be at the cost of Keenan Allen and Khalil Mack. And then just to take a quick look at Corey Linsley. Corey Linsley is also a guy who could be a post-June 1st release. You save $10.5 million against the cap if you do that. That's probably the three big guys that I would be looking at as not being Chargers anymore. Linsley's only 31, but he's been hurt a lot lately. So, I think it's tough to justify, what is he going to earn in actual cash this year? 10.5. And he'll earn 10.5. By center standards, it's not that bad, but, it's tough to justify $10.5 million for a guy who's missed time over the past 2 years since you signed him. So,
and you go ahead.
I was just going to say, those are the guys that I'd keep an eye out. They're all relatively highly paid veterans. All have been disappointing for one reason or another. Keenan Allen, probably the least disappointing aside from his injury this year, but just, you're just probably not doing that again.
Yeah. And I think this is tough because this roster has significant holes. Offensive line has not been reinforced well enough. Clearly, your left tackle goes down, you have problems. Good thing Jamari Sawyer looked good. Otherwise, it'd be a disaster. D-line clearly up the middle is a problem. Linebacker group isn't great. Corner, you've seen some flashes from some players, but you're still not. You have one really good safety. You have one really good corner. You pay J.C. Jackson a bunch of money. The corner market has just been a disaster, I think, for teams paying at the top of it. I would not really be one of those teams who wants to do that in free agency this year again. J.C. Jackson just did not fit schematically what they're doing. He's a man corner. It's very similar to what Washington did with William Jackson. It's just not in these cover four shells where you're trying to just prevent big plays. He's not that type of player. It didn't really work early on. I know he got hurt, but I'm not really expecting big things from him going forward in this defense. And he might be a guy. I don't know what his contract looks like, but he's kind of just going to be sitting there for them, which is unfortunate. But we'll see what ends up happening there, I guess.
I believe his contract is such that he's probably not going anywhere.
Yeah, he's not. I'm looking at it. They can save money post June 1st, but they eat a lot of dead cap.
They would. Let me see. Let me see real quick because I'm not even sure how much they would save post June 1st. Certainly not cap space.
No, they don't.
His guaranteed salary. Yeah, he has $12 million in guaranteed salary, so they would save nothing by moving on.
They could trade him post June 1st, and they'd eat. It would be $20 million total dead cap, and they could save that way. But I don't think anyone is trading for that contract either. So,
absolutely not.
Yeah,
they would save his full $12 million, but again, that would require somebody else to say, "Hey, I want that player for $12 million." You know what I mean?
Who's the one person?
Give up a draft pick.
The one person I could see doing that is it's Bill Belichick.
Nah, he would have paid him if he wanted him.
Yeah, well,
I paid him outright.
I still think it's funny, but
he'll sign him after they release him next year.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
you're right. You're absolutely right. But this is, because you have so many holes. I look at this team as a Jordan Addison, Luke Musgrave, wide receiver, tight end, support it, and just let's try and score. I don't know. They haven't been consistent on one side of the ball at all.
I think it's fixable. I mean, you've got Rashawn Slater coming back. You move Jamari Sawyer over to right tackle, and ideally that works out fairly well. He can't be worse than Trey Pipkins. If you want, you can bring back Corey Linsley. You get Zion Johnson. Yeah, I mean, rookie offensive linemen, they struggle all the time, so you hope for that. And then you swap out Matt Filer for somebody in free agency, okay? You release Keenan Allen. You bring back Mike Williams. You invest a first-round pick at receiver. You got Austin Eckler. You've got Isaiah Spiller for whatever you want to get out of him. They spent a high pick on him too. So You know, it's not a super challenging fix on offense. And then defensively, I mean, you just got to hope that you're getting more out of some of these guys that you've invested in. Joey Bosa missed a bunch of the season. He's not going anywhere. You probably need linebacker help. I mean, it's been kind of weird for them because Kenneth Murray, disappointing, then showed flashes, but still overall disappointing. You know, I think Asante Samuel Jr., Derwin James, Bryce Callahan, that's a viable secondary, especially when you bring back J.C. Jackson and hope for a little more out of him. Switch up your scheme a little bit to try and put him in man situations a little bit more. You know, and again, if you squint, you can kind of see it, but some of these guys that they have paid big money to, they just have to perform better for this to work.
I mean, I have frustrations with the JC because I don't think they can change their scheme for him. Like they run like the very specific, like analytics driven, don't give up big plays, try to win against the run with your 4 guys, sometimes 3 guys down on the defensive line, and sit back and let the game come to you. I guess they could have him play backside man a lot more, but I don't know. You're paying $17 million for that. It's tough. Like I just think that signing was like a complete. They're gonna try, obviously, but I don't think it's gonna work for them. I think they need to. They might even try.
I mean, they got to play him.
They got to. I mean,
they got to at least try to play him.
Unless you draft another corner, but
Yeah, but you need a receiver more than you need a corner. I mean, look, honestly, with this quarterback, you can score enough to overcome your defensive issues. So I would focus on that.
Do that.
But honestly, I'm just saying the reality is that with a new offensive coordinator and a few pieces on offense, this could be one of the best offenses in the NFL.
Yes.
And once you have that, you can overcome some of the defensive issues. But
and the disappointment here is you basically wasted your 3 years of rookie contract of Herbert, it looks like.
Yeah, it sucks, but so you just on some level you just got to move forward and just deal with what's in front of you instead of what's behind. So it's disappointing, and I'm trying not to pile on too hard because I really do think
too much.
I think he doesn't like the coach, and that's fine. I get that. But I just think the reality is their position. There's a lot worse positions to be in the NFL than them. So,
like, side note, like they really went away from the analytics stuff this year in terms of 4th down decision making. Like they relied on their defense a little bit more. Like they kind of lost that game to Jacksonville because Jacksonville did more of the analytics stuff. But that's a whole other discussion.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't love waffling on your ideology either.
Yeah.
I mean. Look, I don't know. We'll talk about that. First of all, we're going to talk about them with the coordinator hire too. So I think we can move on from them now.
Yes.
We honestly this could be a 7-hour podcast or live stream anytime because I don't think we'll ever run out of points to make on any of these teams. But for brevity's sake, we've got to move on here. All right. So now we're going to hit the Dolphins here. The Dolphins are in an interesting situation because they've invested heavily. They have made a concerted effort to get playmakers on both sides of the ball. The big issue that they have is the health of Tua Tagovailoa, and where does that stand, and what does he want to do? And I think right now the company line is Tua is our guy, and he's going to be back. But it's early. You never know what that's going to look like. He obviously wasn't healthy enough to play in the playoffs, and that was only a couple of days ago. So, are they a month in and he's still struggling? And that changes a lot. And, I don't want to speculate on somebody's future when it comes to health like that too much, but I don't think this is a team you can talk about without having that conversation on some level.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing with them is like, where's Tua at, in terms of health. And what's interesting is because they lost their 1st round pick, how interested are they in going after Tom Brady? Because he seems to have a real interest in being involved in their organization. And I don't think anyone really knows where he wants to be. It could be back in Tampa. It could be the Raiders. I've had some people recently say that they don't know that the Raiders thing is really realistic at this point. Maybe he's retiring. Maybe he's going into television. I don't know. But are you in a spot where you feel comfortable telling Tua, hey, take a year. We're going to try and win a Super Bowl here with Tom. You're going to learn some things, and then we're going to come back and kind of reset in 2 years and try this again.
This is not the best look of a that a franchise has right now, and I think that would only make it worse.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we got you hurt. We weren't careful enough when you did get hurt, and now we're not going to give you the chance to play. We're going to go out and get someone else, even though you were playing extremely well when you were in. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think the only way you go after Brady is if the outlook on Tua's health is either very poor or he personally decides to not do this anymore. And then you could justify it, whatever. But after everything, I think it would be a big mistake to go after him if there's any reasonable chance that Tua can be your guy going forward. I don't know. I mean, look, teams do things that are optically bad all the time, but I just feel like it's been one bad media storm after another for them. They, had everything that happened in the offseason when their first round pick was taken away. They had the multiple concussion issues with Tua, and it spanned the entire season at this point. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think Brady is a realistic option for them unless we find out something pretty concrete about Tua in the pretty near future. That's what I think. And look, as far as Vegas, I don't know, but maybe he doesn't want to go there. Maybe I don't know. Maybe they want somebody, because Brady's not even that expensive. So I'm not sure what they want to do out there, but maybe he just doesn't like Josh McDaniels as much as.
Well, it's also just like the point that was made to me is like he's going to be looking to win a Super Bowl next year. And I know the Raiders are like decent, but I don't know how close they really are even with Tom Brady to that. So,
well, I think the thing is you can look at the Bucs situation and you can look at the Dolphins situation. I don't think putting Tom Brady behind this offensive line is a recipe for success. So the issue is that you bring back your left tackle who you hope to be healthier next year. But again, that would be a major outlier based on his history at this point. And then you've got Brandon Shell, Robert Hunt, Connor Williams, Liam Eichenberg. What is that?
They've added so many pieces to this O-line, and it's unfortunate. It just hasn't really worked. Robert Hunt's been solid at guard. I think Connor Williams hasn't been a disaster at center. But Eichenberg, no. Austin Jackson, no.
Brandon Shell, probably not. Not when you got Tom Brady back there who can't move. And
they have to keep trying.
Yeah. And they got to keep trying, and they got to have a left tackle insurance in case Terran Armstead is down again. So the Dolphins I don't think they're in that bad of a spot, but it just doesn't make sense for Brady. They're at $16.3 million over the cap. And then if I just take a look at what viable moves they have to escape that, where are they? There they are. All right. I mean, their most expensive players, Tyreek Hill, Bradley Chubb, Terran Armstead, Emmanuel Ogbah, they're not probably going anywhere. Byron Jones, you could post June 1 him and get 13.6 in cap space, but you always have to remember with that doesn't give you cap space when you have to be compliant. That gives you money that you can either use for extensions in the offseason later, like after the draft, or to roll over to next year. So that doesn't help them now when they got to get compliant. So they got to look some other places. And then Jerome Baker is a guy, I guess, that maybe they could release. He saves them $4 million in cap space. Connor Williams would save him $5 million. So if they didn't feel like he was good enough, they can move on from him there. And then you don't have much. So at that point, you're really looking at restructuring.
Mhm.
So probably Tyreek Hill would get a restructure. Bradley Chubb could. I don't know if I'd want to do that necessarily. So regardless of whatever they do, they can make things work, but they don't really have a lot of flexibility or space. So, and they don't have a first round pick. So I don't think they're in a horrible situation, but adding a quarterback it's not mobile, it just doesn't seem like
Yeah.
a good decision.
Breaching off of that point, which I think is really interesting, I think that the discussions we've had all year with this team is once they get above cap, this is a goal that I think they need to take upon themselves. So the discussions we've had all year is, hey, what they're doing really works, but it's fragile because the moment one of their really important players gets hurt, it falls apart. And that's kind of what actually ended up happening. So what do? You have to go out because I don't think this is a roster that you're going to fill out and make just really good in an offseason, and just find replacement pieces for your important pieces that can do at least as close as possible to making up for your best players when they're injured. I don't know what that looks like, but in terms of I know Jacoby Brissett they just had. I would think about going and getting a guy like that again because I think he can move a little bit. He can make the throws to it, can make, and I think he can make the right reads in this offense. You need a backup like that who I think is good enough that if he's in a starting situation with good players, you feel not bad about it. I think you need to find more speedy receivers that can back up the guys you have on the outside. I think you need a left tackle replacement, maybe even more important than your right tackle replacement based on how many times they've had Tua roll left over the past, whatever games he played in. You need a guy that can step in for Terran Armstead and play better than anyone else in that O-line effectively. And those are their priorities because I think what they're doing is good enough to win a Super Bowl. But once the plan falls apart, they aren't much of anything.
Yeah. I think Tyreek Hill obviously changes the game, but when you got those two players as fast as they are on either side of the field, or potentially sometimes even on the same side of the field, that puts defense in conflict. And if you have just one of those guys, then you can key in on them and just add double coverage, shell coverage much more easily. Now, if one of those guys goes down, then you need somebody who at least has the speed to, again, put defense in conflict. Will they have the same level of production as a player like Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle if they are replacing them? Not necessarily, but you can't completely change the way defenses play against you if one of those guys goes down. Because when it's quarterback, a lot of teams are screwed. It is what it is. It's such an important position. And unless you have an injury-plagued quarterback, it's tough to justify putting a lot at that position. But for other positions, you can't be one piece away from not getting it done. And I just feel like that's where they are with those two players on offense, especially with a run game that's not necessarily hyper effective either. So I think a fast player in this draft that doesn't necessarily warrant a super high pick would probably be a very good move for them. And then fix the offensive line and go out and get a viable backup quarterback who can play in the case of injury.
And I would even look at this guy's played in San Francisco before, but Marquise Goodwin's going to be a free agent. Just have that guy as a depth receiver. He's going to be super cheap. Just have another guy who runs a 4.2 on the bench because, like you just said, the approach needs to be similar no matter who you're trotting out there.
Yeah, and they're already kind of they're not in a horrible situation cap wise, but again, not as flexible as some of the other teams that we've talked about. They can't easily generate as much space, and they're right at the beginning of a few big contracts. Whether it be Bradley Chubb, Terran Armstead, or Tyreek Hill. So that it always makes it a little bit challenging. If you're willing to restructure and double and push money to the future, it's fine. And especially with the cap going up in the future, probably won't be a big deal. But I would be hesitant with a player like Bradley Chubb. I would try and ride that out as it is, just because early returns on that haven't been exceptional. So anything you do to make it harder to release him in the future, something that I would avoid. But again, really it comes down to a few moves to fix some of those issues we talked about, and then whether Tua is available to play or not.
Yes.
All right. Let's move on here. All right, the Minnesota Vikings. So this is another team where the reality is that in many ways they probably should have been better than the way that their playoff game finished. But you can point to a few specific issues that they could fix and probably be right there again. Most of them defensively, some of them on the offensive line. I think they've got the playmakers. I mean, now that they traded for TJ Hawkinson, they're probably going to bring back Dalvin Cook because, I don't think he was stellar this year, but probably still worthy of the contract. It's because running backs don't cost as much. They've got the quarterback, they've got the receivers, and they've got some good tackle play. So it's like, but between those key offensive positions, you should be able to fix this offense in a few areas, really no problem. But defensively is where they need to make some changes. They're just old. They're just straight up old. Harrison Smith is over 30. Patrick Peterson's over 30. Eric Kendricks is over 30. Jordan Hicks has got to be nearing 30. Zadarius Smith has got to be nearing 30 at this point. Dalvin Tomlinson, I don't know his age off the top of my head, but he's got to be nearing 30 as well. I'm going to look up some of these guys just to double check.
I think Tomlinson's younger than that, but
he might be like 26 or something, 28.
He was an Alabama guy, so he's 28, but yeah, he's getting up there a little bit.
And that's fine. That's still in his prime. But the reality is that a lot of these guys are on the older side. Jordan Hicks is probably like 28 or 29 too.
He might be actually older than that. The point stands though. Like this defense was a veteran. Is 30. This is a veteran defense. They got maybe more out of it than anyone expected. They're gonna have to go back to the well and really like retool it again, as they've been trying to do. I'm gonna pull up the draft history, but this has been a team that has kind of entered the draft past few years with like the idea that they both need offensive line and just anything they can possibly find on defense. This is Danielle Hunter's like first full season in what feels like since I was, in high school. And I don't even think he really played a full season. It's just like he played the majority of the games for the first time since then. So he's kind of been a giant question mark. I think they've kind of leveraged the idea that he could play towards, hey, we're good at edge. And it really like finally they made an investment in Zadarius Smith. And I think
Zadarius Smith is 32. Mm-hmm. 30 also, I should say. And
I like that's like the one older guy that I honestly would like consider keeping around just because I think he seems to not be affected by he's had injuries obviously, but when he's on the field, he plays very well. And I don't know, like the drop off could be coming, but I just think when you're in their situation, like you kind of need to play to the fact that he might be able to continue to produce. And if he does, and you can go find any other edge player who's really good in the draft, well, you at least have something to build off of. Because right now I don't really know what their approach defensively is. They have a lot of interesting pieces, but nothing really fits together. And we talked about how reliant they were on that edge pressure. It really was just kind of Zadarius Smith on fifth man blitzes, and they had a decent group up front with Dalvin Tomlinson and even Kyrus Tonga, who kind of played okay. And they added Ross Black, a couple guys who've been drafted the past years. James Lynch is getting some okay snaps. Pat Jones is a third guy, has been decent, but they aren't. This isn't like a killer unit, it's fine, and so it's everywhere. Like they need interior, they need edge, they need corner, safety's getting older. They're eventually going to need to replace Smith, and linebacker group is actually one of the better linebacker groups, but they're also just super old there. And it's like, the whole unit needs an overhaul. You're not going to do it in an off season. Unfortunately they did draft Lewis Seen and Andrew Booth. We talked about the last podcast, to kind of help out that secondary. And both of them were kind of hurt all year. Booth is a guy that I wasn't expecting to produce much year one anyways, but Seen was a guy we really just didn't get to see at all. And I was excited to see what he could do because he got hurt in preseason and was out the whole year.
I think he's such a good fit for their defense too. So that's definitely disappointing. Probably would have gotten some solid production. And here's the thing. You look at this team and it's like a lot of really good players. I mean, Danielle Hunter is a good player. Zadarius Smith, good player. Jordan Hicks, good player. Eric Kendricks, really good player. Patrick Peterson, a wily vet. So even if he's not as athletic as he once was, he's still generally in the right position. But this is just a league that doesn't it makes it hard on defense, and it definitely makes it hard on old defense. You can get by with older offensive players more easily than you can get by with older defensive players. So this is not a defensive roster that's, that lends itself to success. So you gotta probably make some serious changes. And if you are bringing in a bunch of younger guys, you do want some veteran leadership there. I think Danielle Hunter, I think they gave him, or they restructured his contract. So let me just double check what he looks like right now. So they could post June 1 him. No, they wouldn't make any difference. Or it would. Trade. Cut. Yeah, they could save a little bit with a post June 1 cut. They don't really save anything with guaranteed. They don't really save anything with the trade prior to, aside from just his salary. He is scheduled to earn this year not a lot of money, though. He's only supposed to get about $5 million. Yeah, I mean, he's looking at about $5.5 million in terms of total cost. So I don't think Danielle Hunter's going anywhere. That's crazy. That's pretty low. And then his contract is set to void after that. So yeah, I don't think he's going anywhere. I think you can rock with Zadarius Smith again too. I think it's basically anyone from the second level back is where you probably need to start making moves to get a little bit cheaper, a little bit younger. Kendrick's good player, but he saves you $9.5 million against the cap. Cousins, you could save a little bit by restructuring him. Adam Thielen, you could save 6 by cutting him pre-June 1st, or if you went post-June 1st, $13 million. So that's a guy where you could free up some space. Harrison Smith, you could save some money by releasing him as well. So, a lot of these guys are legacy players, but I think you got to consider just moving on from them for the sake of, being more competitive now than thinking about the past.
I don't think people realize that Adam Thielen is going to be 33 at the start of next year. Like, he's up there. Like, I don't know how many years he actually has left. Not even because I don't think he's playing his best ball anymore. Clearly, I think he's like at the point of, hey, does he got 2 years left in his career? Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. I would not be shocked if he gets released. The one that's been tough for them is Harrison Smith, because that fan base loves Harrison Smith, and he's played well. He just also is kind of hitting that point in his career where he's a little older, and you just wonder if there's going to be a drop off at some point. He's going to be 34 very soon here. He didn't have a great season this year. He was good. And they probably
he's expensive for a 33-year-old safety who I imagine will be 34 for the majority of next season.
Mm-hmm.
If they pricey.
Somehow make it to the Super Bowl next year, he'll be 35 in that game. Yeah. So, yes, I think that's a guy they need to figure out the PR of that and just move on, because I think they've been pressured into kind of keeping him around from Vikings fans. I know it seems.
Well, here's the thing. He got his extension from the regime prior to this. That guaranteed him money in 2021 and 2022. Going forward, if he's on the roster on March 20th, $1.25 million of his roster is guaranteed. So if I were them, I'd be like, look, we love having you. You're a great leader. You're excellent with the organization. Let's bring that salary down from $14.5 million. Well, that's base salary. You can leave him roster bonuses, I guess. But bring that down to, I don't know, maybe like $8 million, and we'll guarantee it or something like that, because otherwise we're probably going to have to release you, and I think at his age and the fact that his guarantees have run out, either he's going to say yes or he's going to say no. But if I played in one place my entire career, I would probably just take the pay cut and not want to uproot my family and all that. So I think there are ways to keep him on the roster. at a lower cap hit and still protect yourself from any media negativity and maintain him as a leader. So I think that's definitely something that they could look into and could probably make happen.
Yeah, for sure. I think what's tough with this team also going forward is just that I know they're 13-4 this year. I don't think this is a 13-4 team. I don't know that they're the second best team in this division next season, probably because I think Green Bay is going to shed a lot of talent. But I think Detroit is like on paper and really a lot of the advanced metrics, like a better football team than the Vikings. Arguably outplayed them in both games they played this year.
Yeah.
I don't know, like the expectation here from fans, because this is a very dedicated fan base, is going to be that they're going to be competing again next year. And I just think realistically, their goal is to win like 10 games next year. And if they can do that, like
I think they should be back in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. I think when you look at what's already on the roster, what assets they have to reinvest, they should still be in the playoffs next year. It would be not just for the fans, but like from a 10,000 foot view NFL opinion, it would be a disappointment if they didn't make the playoffs. But I think that they should be able to. So again, they need to get younger. They need to shed some of these guys. I think Justin Jefferson is good enough that you don't need a $10+ million receiver who's over 30 to be your number two. I think you could probably get younger and cheaper there and still be pretty solid. Whether I don't know specifically who that might be in this moment, but it's definitely doable. And they'll get some guys back from injury that they drafted, like you mentioned, and then they still have a first and a third round pick to add as well to guys that could probably contribute in the upcoming year. So, this should all be fixable. I don't think they're going to go into this season like, loaded like the Eagles or 49ers, but
I think they're
sometimes you
closer
get surprising
to the Giants, Commanders, Seahawks portion of the NFC than the Eagles, 49ers, Cowboys.
Yeah, it's probably true.
And I think
that's probably
what's
true.
tough with them is, and not this is going to happen until these guys have been healthy, but it's kind of, there's a Dolphins thing here. Like if Justin Jefferson gets hurt for an extended period of time, or Kirk Cousins gets hurt for an extended period of time, or Christian Darrisaw gets hurt for an extended period of time, they're a little bit in trouble. Like they're not really reinforced any of those positions well enough to make up for that. So not that this was like the year for them to really win the Super Bowl, because I don't think they were good enough, but it's a little disappointing they didn't even win a playoff game.
Yeah, it's disappointing anytime you make it to the playoffs and you don't win. I'm not that down on them. I'm not. I think I'm as far as rookie head coaches go, that's fine. It's fine. A difference of opinion is a good thing. But I think, maybe some of our expectations are a little bit colored by what Brian Dable has been able to do, especially like in that playoff matchup. But as far as rookie head coaches go, especially young ones like Kevin O'Connell, this was a good season.
Yes.
And this defense, it's not like a situation where they can't move on from guys. It's not where they're locked in. Like they have draft picks who will come back healthy, so that like they don't even have to do anything to get better talent or younger talent. Like that's there. They can make this a good team. So this Post-Mortem is probably one that I'm more optimistic about than others. The Chargers, say what you want about the coaching staff, that maybe that colors your opinion, but they can fix it and the Vikings can fix it. The Dolphins, I don't want to say that I'm not optimistic, but it's just like the caveat to that is kind of scary. You know what I mean? It's out there. I would say the Seahawks, I'm very optimistic about. And, that's just sort of where I'm ranking how these teams are right now. But let's move on again before we spend too much time. We've got the Ravens here coming up. Ravens are interesting. So there is really no reason that the Ravens should not be one of the best teams in the NFL next year. based on having cap space available, based on draft picks available, and the current talent, there is every opportunity for them to be very, very good. But does Lamar Jackson get paid and stay with the organization? That is the ultimate question. And if he moves on somewhere else, who would be willing to take on that contract? And what would the Ravens get in return? What kind of package of picks? And then what do they do at quarterback? So there's a lot of questions there. I'm going to start in defense and work back to the offense because I think the defense is easier. It's a simpler answer. They've got Marcus Williams. They've got Marlon Humphrey. They've got Marcus Peters. It's like, how many Marcuses we have here? They've got Roquan Smith. They've got Kyle Hamilton. They've got Odafe Owe. And then they've got their guys on the interior, however many it might be. They've got David Ajabo. This defense, you don't really need to do much with this, right? I don't think you need to really make major changes here. I think it would help if some of the guys were healthier throughout the entire year. But once they got Roquan Smith, this is one of the better defenses in the NFL. And I'm not sure what you really need to do to get better there.
I just think they need some corner reinforcement because Marcus Peters might be gone. But no, this is the closest thing we have, I think, outside of like Philly to just a defense that has every unit filled out with depth. You look at, the corners obviously are good. Marcus Williams, Chark Clark, Geno Stone is like a nice 1-2-3 at safety. Kyle Hamilton ends up being one of the better slot corners in the NFL in his rookie season. Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen ended up looking like a great linebacker duo this year. Tyus Bowser, Justin Houston, David Ajabo, Odafe Owe, JPP. It's like 5 deep at edge, just like kind of like Philly. And then even on the interior, like Calais Campbell, Justin Madubuike is a really nice 1-2 at DT. Broderick Washington has played some really good snaps for them as well. And then they're just developing Travis Jones, who I had as like a top 35 player on my draft board last year behind those guys. So they are really reinforced there. Their focus has to be on the other side of the ball this offseason, I think.
Yeah, I'm just want to take a super quick look at who is projected to be a free agent. No one super important outside of Jackson and Marcus Peters, I think. As I'm just scrolling up, Geno Stone, he's set to be a free agent. Jason Pierre, some of those like older edge guys, Justin Houston, Jason Pierre-Paul, Juwan James. Guys that are mostly depth rotational guys or depth pieces. So it's really Marcus Peters and Lamar Jackson are the two big questions. And I trust them to find a cornerback answer. And so that's kind of as much as I really wanted to talk about their defense. It's good. I don't think they need to really make many changes there. I mean, for all we know, there's somebody that's already on the roster that can step right in and be a good corner because that's just how they operate. But the offense, they've got some guys here. I mean, unfortunately, at outside receiver, they need help. With $28.2 million and some draft picks, they can make that happen. Offensive line, they have Ronnie Stanley back. They have Tyler Linderbaum, who's really good. I think Morgan Moses was signed to a 2-year deal, so he'll be back. I think Kevin Zeitler also is a multi-year deal, so he should be back. So they're pretty good there. They've got depth guys that they've drafted. Ben Cleveland, guys like that. They've got Falele, who's probably going to be swing tackle or, extra jumbo tackle. But outside receiver and the Lamar Jackson question. So which one of those do you want to address first?
Well, actually, I also think the O-line needs a little more reinforcing just because Ben Powers, I believe, is a free agent who's maybe their better guard. I do like Ben Cleveland, but Zeitler getting a little older. And then Ronnie Stanley has had so many injuries and has really not played well since he's been injured. I just think that they're a team that is going to be looking at tackle help in the draft. But yes, receiver has been a question for them for a long time. I actually really think a guy like Deshaun Jackson I know he's not going to be playing for them long term, but like I think they need a guy like that because the style of offense they play, I think just doesn't work with your normal X receiver. I think Rashad Bateman is like as many of those types as they're going to be able to support. I would be very interested again, like I bring up Jordan Addison, but like guys like that, like I think they need a Marquise Brown type deep threat for this offense to work. That's their over the top. And then you reinvest in the fact that you run the ball. Now, this is again assuming Lamar Jackson's going to be your quarterback. Maybe he's not. Maybe you go in a complete different direction, or maybe, you know, if you get rid of him and you end up drafting, maybe Anthony Richardson ends up being your QB and you're just running the same offense anyway. So the Jackson question, it's tough because I don't know that question is going to be answered first. And that's really kind of what they need to have answered first to understand what direction this offense needs to go in.
Yeah. So, you know, we've heard speculation about him going to the Jets. You've heard speculation about him going to the Falcons. Those are the two teams that kind of seem like hypothetical front runners. There's always teams that come out of the woodwork. You know, I'm not sure that they want to throw down the money or the picks, but like, you know, I wouldn't be shocked if a team like the Raiders was sitting there waiting to get in on that bidding war. I don't know that they want to throw down that kind of money, like I said, but always something to consider. They're always kind of a wild card. You know, there will be other teams who are interested. It'll depend on how insistent he is to get a fully guaranteed contract. It'll depend on what the draft compensation would be. I mean, how many, what kind of draft trade package do you think it would require to get the Lamar Jackson, excuse me?
I think the Russ trade is more along the lines of what they're going to have realistically be looking at. Just because I think although Deshaun got more, I think with some of these trades, we've seen kind of the potential downfall of missing on a player, what the contract can do to you. Team might cough up 3 first-round picks. I don't think they'll go and give 3 firsts and 3 seconds and players. I think you're probably looking at like 3 firsts, maybe like a third with that, or, you know, 2 firsts, a couple thirds, and maybe a player or 2. It's going to be a big package if they end up trading him. It's going to be ultimately my thing with it is based on the way teams have operated. I would expect them to trade him to the NFC because that just seems to be a theme that has been ongoing with these QB trades, other than Matthew Stafford, really, is teams try to get rid of them in a way that they're not going to be facing that player that they just traded away.
Yeah, Watson was an AFC to AFC,
Sure.
but that was kind of a weird situation. I don't understand the insistence that he could just go wherever he wanted to. I mean, like that whole thing ended up just being like they wanted to get rid of him so badly that they kind of just didn't care, and the trade packages seemed like consistent across teams. But it's like, I don't know, they didn't want to touch him with a 10-foot pole.
It became a thing where the teams were pitching to Deshaun Watson and not to the Texans.
Right, but like that only happened because they were so desperate to get him out of the building.
Yeah.
Right? Like they 100% could have said, "Look, I don't care that you want to go to the Browns more than the Falcons. We're going to send you to the Falcons because they're sending the same number of picks and they're picking higher." Like they could have done that.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to string out the process anymore. They probably wanted to get him out of Houston as soon as physically possible. So I think that's why that happened. But, you know, again, I don't think we're going to see that type of thing. It just depends. Is anybody else going to offer that fully guaranteed contract? Because will Arthur Blank be sitting there and be like, I said no to Lamar, or I said no to Deshaun about the fully guaranteed, and now I regret it. You know, or is he like, yeah, I said no, and that because we don't operate like that, and I'm just not doing it. Will the Jets do a fully guaranteed contract? They've been pretty staunch in a lot of their contract practices, so it just kind of seems like a long shot for them there too. So that's a big question.
Yeah. And I ultimately think what's going to happen here is kind of what seems to happen with a lot of these quarterback deals is he's going to get tagged. A lot of people are going to expect a type of trade at that point. And he might just end up playing on the tag. And I don't know what that's going to, because it's been tough for this team. Like, they have been good, but they have entered the postseason with an injured Lamar Jackson, or a late season postseason run without Lamar Jackson 2 years in a row now, and have gone from, an 8-3 team to, wow, we're not even competing for winning playoff games in January. And that's tough. And I don't know. I'm going to be honest. Like, I have no clue what management thinks of him at this point, because you would expect a team like Baltimore to really be ready to pay him. They have their shit together, quite frankly, in a way that's just like, it's a little shocking he wasn't paid. It makes me think that they are not willing.
It's him buckling down. So this whole Roquan Smith thing is really interesting. I think there's some background to it. Roquan Smith is another player who operates without an agent. And I kind of think this is them saying, look, we can do a deal with players who don't have agents. That's not a problem. We traded for and signed Roquan Smith to a $100 million deal with $45 million in guarantees. Like, this is not about you not having an agent. It's not about anything. It's about what you want is something that we just don't do. And how does he take that? I think also the urgency with which they signed Smith is because they can't use a tag on him, because they need to reserve the tag for Jackson. Mm-hmm. And I think they put the tag on him, and I think ultimately they do get a deal worked out. Because I think when you look at the concept of being fully guaranteed plus all the picks that you'd have to give up, that's just so much.
Yeah,
it's so much. And for other teams to want to do that,
let's just take like Washington, for example, who needs a quarterback. I would not be a fan, only because this roster is like pretty much as finished as you can get in the NFL without the depth.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you pay a guy like that, well, you're not going to have picks to replace the talent when you start not being able to pay some of your younger players. Like, you're going to slowly lose talent as that contract goes on, and it's almost guaranteed at that point, because they have players they need to re-sign this offseason if they want to kind of maintain their identity, And I think even last year, there were opportunities more for teams to do that, considering the leveraging of a non-guaranteed contract. But when you go guaranteed, like, you're going to eat up all of your cap space. And it's tough for any regime to really invest unless you're maybe early on and you have a long-term plan. You're not really going to be the type of team that's ready to do that.
Well, you can always make cap space work. I think it's just more about there's teams in contract negotiations. They care about precedent. And the reason for that is that anytime you break precedent, then there's not much leg for you to stand on to not continue to break precedents in other places. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of why teams do this. So if you agree to guarantee this percentage of a deal, then for this player, then the next player who maybe even has the same agent, it's like, okay, so how come you did it for them but not for this guy? Well, we don't do that. Well, obviously you do that, right? So you lose this pretty firm bargaining chip that this is how we operate. And then it's player after player after player who start pushing for that contract, caveat, whatever it is. And so if you start doing fully guaranteed contracts for quarterbacks, quarterback is the most expensive position and most important position. So like maybe you can justify it in that way, but eventually there's going to be a situation where there's a super all-star pass rusher. There's a JJ Watt out there who doesn't get a deal done with his team because they're a dysfunctional organization or whatever, and he wants a fully guaranteed contract. And so some other team is going to, if a quarterback fully guaranteed starts to become the norm, then there's going to be the pass rusher 6-7 years down the line who wants that. And then it comes to a point where and I know that sounds far away, but this is what these teams think about. That they think about, if I appease this request, what position does that put me in the future? And they just don't want to do that. And they don't want to make fully guaranteed deals for quarterbacks that aren't Lamar Jackson or aren't Patrick Mahomes or whoever. They don't want to make a fully guaranteed deal for Geno Smith, right? So it has a lot of implications that people just aren't really truly aware of, and that's where the team and the player are at odds here. But because I don't see other teams wanting to make that move, I do ultimately think that they get a deal done. I think he'll request a trade. He'll probably talk to teams around the league. They'll probably get feedback that nobody wants to do a fully guaranteed contract, especially with all the draft picks that they have to give up. And then be in a Deshaun Watson situation, where it's not because he's suspended, but because he gets hurt in week 3, and then they have a horrible season with all this money invested, and then they're shelling away the 6th overall pick to the Ravens. It's like nobody wants to do that. So I that's why I just think the most likely outcome is that he is Baltimore Raven after a franchise tag and a lengthy negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's my diatribe.
Time on the Ravens.
Yes. Well, they just have an interesting.
Yeah, they do a very interesting situation. And I think, I agree with you. I ultimately think he ends up playing there in some form next season.
All right, so we'll go quick on the Bucs just because the Bucs are gonna have to blow this thing up.
Yeah,
they've got a bunch of super expensive players. They have very little cap space. When I say space, they have negative space. They have a fair amount of draft picks, but Tom Brady's probably not going to be back. I have to wonder if Todd Bowles will even be back after the way that the season closed out. They haven't made that move yet, so we're not really going to talk about it with the rotation. But I would not be at all surprised if that was something that occurred in the next week or two, because it was ugly as the season went on. Yeah, they made it to the playoffs, but it was an ugly season, an ugly close to the season, and an ugly playoff game. Like it not good.
Yeah, and I heard a rumor that Brady kind of shipped it in halfway through the season because the offense was just sputtering and he was frustrated with Leftwich. And breaking news, they had kind of said that this was going to happen. They fired Byron Leftwich. His offense, which kind of got praised in previous years, really, I was never a big fan of what they were doing over there. It's very old-fashioned, kind of a lot of early down running, a lot of basic concepts. That was a problem. Their offensive line really kind of showed some issues this year. Didn't have enough depth, didn't have the high-end players. Receiving core was beat up. And then defense has pieces, but, you kind of catch a little bit of a lower end of variance from it. And you can see how this thing kind of all fell apart at once. And I agree. I think this is the start, them getting a little Leftwich. I'm kind of surprised. I mean, I guess Bowles is going to be back next year, but I don't know how long he's really going to be there for. I would expect Brady's gone. I don't know who's going to play quarterback. We've kind of guessed that it's going to be like a Gardner Minshew type. And I think this is a team that might be kind of tanking next year.
Well, they don't have a lot of opportunity to create space. And those that they would create gaping holes at certain positions. So to get cap compliant, like a guy like Donovan Smith saves some $10 million against the cap, but then you have no left tackle. And then you're like, okay, can Tristan Wirfs play left tackle? Maybe he can. Because it wasn't like he was for sure going to be a right tackle coming into the NFL. You know what I mean? Like that was not just an assumption. Like I think most teams looking at him were considering taking him as a left tackle. So that's possible, but not a guarantee. Russell Gage, prayers up to him after the injury that he had, but he saves about $3 million, so not really a lot. Shaq Mason saves about $5 million, so not really a lot. you're cutting a lot of these guys. Leonard Fournette, basically 3.5, not a lot. So, your biggest cap hit is Tom Brady, and he's not even going to be on the roster. He's a $35 million dead cap hit just because his contract voids. So, I mean, for him, he doesn't even have base salary. So, for him, what they could do maybe for him is, let's say, let me look at his deal because it's a void contract. So what they might be able to do with Brady is, they might be able to sign him to a extension. They could sign him to an extension with a vet minimum base salary and then just June 1st release him. So basically, like, they would save 20 some million on the cap until after June 1st. Or, I mean, until next. Anyway, so that's something that they could do if they wanted to get creative with it. Because obviously, you'd have to convince him to come back if you wanted to. I don't know that he would want to come back. So that would be, presumptive with him going. Then, you're creating challenging holes for yourself every other way by releasing guys. I mean, Ryan Jensen, you don't save any money. Vita Vea, you don't save any money. Shaq Barrett, you don't save any money. Chris Godwin, no. Mike Evans, only $2.3 million. Even with a trade. Yeah, even with a trade, you don't save hardly any money unless it's post June 1st. So anyway, that's my spiel on their cap situation, which is not good. They're gonna have to get a little creative to get that done. To work that. Probably Ryan Suckup would get released. He's $3.25 million, so it's like you don't really have the space to justify having a multi-million-dollar kicker. But
yeah, and I don't know. It's an ugly loss in the wild card round, is what I'll say about that game. And looking back on it, don't really know why I thought they were going to win. Dallas, this is why you don't overreact to like one or two games of bad play. Dallas was always the better team. Tampa kind of had been up and down all year, and ultimately Dallas was like the better team by probably more than the line said, and I think it showed on Monday night.
yeah, and again, even if they were trying to convince Brady to come back somehow, they still don't have a lot of space to make that roster better.
No,
like a lot of options for that. They've doubled down on who was already there. So my basic takeaway from this is that if Todd Bowles stays, they've got to commit to him for a couple of years and say, look, we're we had our run, we're breaking it down, we're moving on. We're gonna have to get creative with the cap to get compliant this year, and then we're gonna do a quick rebuild. Maybe 2 years from now, we'll be competitive again. That's kind of the way that I would look at this.
Mm.
You wouldn't save much space with a Mike Evans trade, but you get some assets, some stuff like that. So that's kind of, what I think would be the answer for them. Any other thoughts on the Bucs? I mean, they have a pretty good defense, so that won't immediately dissipate. A lot of these guys are pretty young, pretty good. Levante David, actually, he's set to be a free agent, so that's something. They're going to lose Akeem Hicks and William Golston. They're going to lose a lot of guys, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah. I mean, next year's a really good quarterback class. I think that's what they have to be trying to do right now.
All right. That's going to do it for our post-mortem. We didn't leave ourselves a ton of time for the coaching cycle, but let's take a look at here what we got. All right. Okay. So we have head coach openings and some notes that you've assembled on some of the people that they have currently interviewed or speculatively are going to interview. Obviously, we don't have all of the names here because there's a lot that just haven't come out officially. There's a lot of speculation about certain guys that fans are talking about right now, or who have been put out by beat writers as like, this is a possible guy that they'll interview. But the lists would be really long for every single team if we operated that way. So this is what we're looking at right now. We're gonna go through them in order of what we've got so far, and then I put out some questions to a few guys who follow these teams on Twitter. I got some answers. I think I got at least one answer for almost all of these here. So, okay, I got another one here. Okay. All right. Arizona Cardinals. So they move on from Cliff Kingsbury. Vance Joseph was the D coordinator. He's a possibility. Frank Reich, after being released by the Colts, he's a possibility. Sean Payton has been in conversations. And Steve Wilks is did I put Steve Wilks on the wrong team?
Yeah, you put him on Arizona.
Yeah, my bad. All right, so let's pretend Steve Wilks is under the Panthers, and you can ignore him here. That's my bad. Okay. But yeah, so that's kind of who they've been talking to so far. There's other speculation as well. And I'll let you go through what you found on them and what your thoughts on them are before we hit our poll in quotes.
So they're tough because I legitimately think the Jeff Saturday thing is like might be real. I don't think they should do that. I don't really have a feeling as to what they're going to do. I think they really wanted Jim Harbaugh, and that's not happening now. He's going back to Michigan. Ultimately, the thing that I find very interesting is that Ballard is supposedly leading the search. I thought this was going to be a very Jim Irsay offseason where he kind of takes over. Maybe that's not the case. I would not count out Aaron Glenn just because I think he has shown leadership abilities in Detroit that maybe at other places you don't necessarily see, even though I don't think his defense has been great. They've had a lack of talent there. I don't know that really matters all that much when you're looking for a head coach anymore. You really want a guy who can kind of run the program. D'Amico Ryans has always been my top candidate this offseason. I really like him. I don't think he's going to leave San Francisco for any of these jobs. So for them, I think Morris and Glenn are kind of your top two candidates. And just based on the fact that I'm not certain Morris really is the best head coach type. I think Aaron Glenn is the guy I'd lean for them at this point, but I ultimately don't know that the guy that they're going to hire has been interviewed yet.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I mean, I don't know. I think Frank Reich is an interesting option for them. Frank will 100% be a coordinator if he doesn't get a head coach job, and there are a few teams that are interested in him for that. But I don't know. I don't think it would be. If they went with a Vance Joseph type guy, then it would really require them to have him to have a staff with an offensive play caller that had a really clear vision for Kyler Murray and what they want to do, right? I mean, that's true for even a head coach, but for the defensive coordinator who's already there, he's got to really sell the new GM on a guy who he believes can come in and be his offensive coordinator, who can do, who can operate with what Kyler does well. So I don't know who that would be. Frank Reich, I think that selling point as far as the offense, it really helps as far as interviews for him. Sean Payton, yeah, but I don't think he's going to go there either. Aaron Glenn is interesting, but once again, he needs to have an offensive coordinator who he can sell as the guy. So I don't know who might that be. Do you have anybody in mind, or at least what type of scheme that they would want to operate with?
I mean, I think that I ultimately thought Sean Payton would be really interested in the Cardinals job. But, it doesn't seem like he's interested in any of these other than Denver, I guess, because of his future with Russell Wilson. He wanted to coach him up. I don't know, because Cliff Kingsbury did such a weird thing offensively with them. It was more of a college scheme than an NFL scheme that it's tough to know what direction they go in, but I think you're going to be moving away a little bit from the mobility that Kyler has post this injury. Frank Reich's interesting. I don't know that he takes that job because I just think they're not that they're a mess, but it's a tough. None of these jobs are great right now. Like, I think sometimes you get a coaching job every year where there's one that like stands out as like, oh, it's Jacksonville. Like, they have all these picks. They're gonna get Trevor Lawrence. Like, you get to rebuild it the way you want to. Or it's last year. I mean, I can't think off the top of my head who was but Tampa, even if that had ended up being something that they were interviewing for, because they did interview, even though they eventually hired in-house, like Tom Brady and all these pieces, you can go win now. None of these are like perfect, and Arizona would be the top one if not for the fact that Kyler might not play the first month, maybe more of the season because of this injury. And that's a little scary because you don't really know what you're going to be doing to develop your roster without a quarterback at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also gives you, a little bit of a built-in pass because, then whether you don't perform well without him or he doesn't look that good when he gets back, like, you have time. So, I don't know, for a guy like Frank Reich, who's on his second stint, maybe that's appealing because maybe if you go into where that's all like well set up, like hypothetically, then you go in and you disappoint. Like, maybe they're like, okay, look, we're done with this after 1 year. If you're already on if you're a rookie head coach, usually you have a couple of years to figure things out. If you're a vet head coach, then the expectation is usually rapid improvement. And this might be a way to kind of work around that a little bit. But all right, so we're not going to spend as long on each team here just because we got to get through all of these. But Donnie Clemens at Pick and Spreads on Twitter and on TikTok used to do the Boomer Bust Draft Show with you. He wants Brian Flores. Follows Cardinals fan. He wants Brian Flores. So just because they're not on this list doesn't mean you couldn't choose them. That's who he went with. Initial or like quick take on Brian Flores?
I like Brian Flores. I think for any team, he's a good hire. I don't know that he wants to be a head coach at this point, but we'll see. If he does go to Arizona, I think that would work.
Yeah. All right. Similar to Vance Joseph, again, got to bring in an offensive coordinator who fits well, but I do think he, a very different type of personality than Cliff Kingsbury was. That's for sure. All right. Next up, we have, I'm just going to drop these in here from now on. For the Panthers, they are looking at Ken Dorsey, Sean Payton, Frank Reich, some of the same names here, and Steve Wilkes, who is the interim coordinator, Anthony Rizzuti, who is the managing editor for Panthers Wire. He says he thinks that Steve Wilkes should come back, and even though this wasn't really part of the poll, I asked him, what did you think? What do you think about an offensive coordinator then? You bring back McAdoo, you look for a fresh face. And he's like, I think you look for a fresh face. You probably look for like somebody who's a younger guy if you do. But he's done enough to warrant coming back. That was his take. So what are your thoughts on the Panthers as they are?
I don't dislike it. If you stick with Wilkes, I think continuity is key. But I do also think this is a team that's going to be drafting a quarterback. And Ken Dorsey, based on working with Josh Allen, some of the things they've done over there, I think because I do believe in what I've heard, this is a team that really is interested in Will Levis. I just think the similarities there. I really would like to see him work with a Ken Dorsey, but that's just me.
Yeah, I understand. But at the same time, like Ken Dorsey, that would be a pretty quick come up from where he was to OC to just calling plays to being a head coach. Like, I think, I would want to give him more time to mature into that role. Not because I don't think he'd be good, but it's like the younger you start, the more on-the-job learning you have. So that's just something that I consider. But so I don't know. I mean, I think Steve Wilkes he kind of got a rough situation in Arizona, one and done for with one of the worst quarterbacks drafted in a long time. So I'd love to see an African-American head coach actually get a second opportunity with a little bit more longevity, you know what I mean, with a team where he's proven that he can lead them pretty effectively. I mean, yeah, it was a bad division, but they almost made the playoffs with a lot of fluctuation, a lot of turnaround at some key positions. So I would be totally fine with Steve Wilkes there, and I like the idea that Ken Dorsey is an up and comer, but I'd hold off on that a little bit. We don't know what kind of quarterback developer he really is. You know what I mean? How much is Brian Daboll? I'm sure he could potentially have a really good interview, but I'd hold off just a little bit on that hire personally. All right. The Denver Broncos. So the Broncos, they are probably the front runners for Sean Payton. They also have had talks with Dan Quinn and David Shaw. So some big time names for a legacy organization. They, if they were to bring in Sean Payton, they have the money to spend. We've talked about the Waltons before. They've got more money than they could ever know what to do with. Dan Quinn has a relationship with Russell Wilson from the time in Seattle. So I don't know if that's a selling point or if maybe he's like, maybe I don't want to jump right back into that. David Shaw from Stanford, that's an interesting name as well. I don't remember what his NFL coaching experience looks like. And as far as I'm concerned, I would rather hire an offensive coordinator from college to be an offensive coordinator in the pros before I would hire a head coach from college to go straight into the pros, just because it's a very different animal. And again, that's probably even more on the job learning than a younger offensive coordinator. You know what I mean? That's already in the NFL coming up to that position. So I don't know if I'd want to jump on that if I were them, but it's an interesting name to say the least.
I think the David Shaw thing is John Elway's Stanford connection. That's all.
Yeah, probably. That could well be. But so, and the guys that I asked, so John Heath is the managing editor for Broncos Wire. He wants Sean Payton, shocker, and Brison Owens from Denver Sports Betting.com, and one of our mainstay Pick'em guys on our weekend shows. He also wants Sean Payton. Look, if my organization was in the front for Sean Payton, easy choice. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, I mean, it makes sense why they would want him. If you're trying to fix the Russell Wilson trade, this is probably the best guy to do it. I think the question you need to ask is, how much more certain are you that Sean Payton is the right guy to fix Russell Wilson than a Dan Quinn who's worked with him before? And the reason I ask that is the money thing doesn't really matter, but you're going to have to give up your first-round pick. And I just don't know that this is a team that really wants to be doing that right now. Now, well, that being said, like, you give up Bradley Chubb and got Sean Payton in return and cleared some cap space. Like, that's not a bad deal.
I mean, think about this. Just consider this. This is probably going to happen because he's even stated it would take a mid to late first-round pick to get this done. I mean, like, guess who just happens to have a mid to late first round pick and is also looking for a head coach. So I think it's out of the conference. It's definitely out of the division. So I don't think, he'd be going to the Panthers, especially with a top pick like they have. So, I mean, to me, this is just too easy, I think. So opinions on it. I think he's a great coach, and either he'll fix Russ or he won't, and he'll build up a team after Russ is done. But I think if you can get Sean Payton, you should do it. That's my opinion.
Right, it's fair. I agree.
All right, the Houston Texans. So I didn't get any feedback for this one. I just don't think anybody wants to talk about the Texans.
I don't know who they would hire right now at this point. I don't think Gannon's a great candidate. I don't know that Evero really is going to take this job because he's kind of early and still trying to develop. Same with Thomas Brown. I don't know. I could see this. They can't one and done again, but maybe they can. I don't know. They're just tough. You gotta find someone who really wants to work with Bryce Young.
So even if they don't one and done, it's not a good opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean they'd be able to draft a quarterback high, but I mean, Jonathan Gannon and Ejiro Evero. Anytime you bring in a defensive head coach and you want to draft a quarterback, you've got to have a clear plan in place for his development and who's going to guide that. Because we saw that with the Jets and Mike LaFleur. And it's like, I think maybe he should have stayed, maybe not. But regardless, I think he can scheme on offense. The big question is, was he a net negative in the development of Zach Wilson? And if you do bring in a head coach that's defensive, even if he's a very good head coach, that position is so important. You've got to have answers for it. So I'm not sure who those might be, who they would be talking about bringing over. I think Thomas Brown probably, that I mean, you don't have that same issue, but I mean, I don't know. Who do you think would be the ideal fit for the Texans, whether they're here or not?
Thomas Brown probably, but I just don't know that he'd take these people. The people interview with the Texans kind of probably are figuring out exactly what it looks like. There's no guarantee, in my opinion, that any of these people are like jumping at the gun with the Texans offering them a contract. You know what I mean? So it's kind of going to be whoever they pick and is willing to coach for them. And then the thing that's tough about it is I don't know that Casario's back next year. If they struggle again, maybe drafting a quarterback lengthens their time period there. But this organization is just in a spot that is very difficult to read right now. And it almost has to be like and you have a couple of these guys, all these guys on the board right now are this type of coach, but it needs to be a young coach who's desperate for an opportunity.
You can't go the older coach who needs, like a David Culley, who needs his first opportunity, or an older coach who's already been a 2-time retread. And I just don't even know if those coaches were necessarily outright bad. I mean, I think they slightly overperformed with David Culley based on that roster.
Yeah, I think Culley, they probably, at the very least, should have kept around for another year, just because public relations wise, you're not dealing with the problem of no one wanting to go there maybe at this point, because you don't know if you're going to have your job after a year.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty freaking ugly, but I'm not really a huge fan of Caserio at this point either, to be honest, in just terms of what he's done with the roster. But
yeah,
they have an interesting position for going forward. All right, Colts. Seems like we have a lot of Colts influence on this show. I didn't even get a chance to ask Noah or Kyle Nishida what they want to do with the Colts, but we'll have an opportunity to talk to them soon. But Lawrence Owen and our Colts loyalist, or RC Evans from the Colts Law YouTube channel, they want Sean Payton and Raheem Morris and George Bremer from the Herald Bulletin. He also thinks Raheem Morris is the best fit. So, I mean, what do you think about Raheem Morris coming into the Colts locker room?
Yeah, so jump the gun on this one. I think Morris is the safest of the guys they've interviewed. And I'm assuming, I don't think D'Amico Ryans goes there. I think he's the best guy on this list. So Morris is the safest. Aaron Glenn is the one that I think if you hit on, is really works for them. I think it's tough that they're looking at defensive. This is kind of the same thing with Houston. Like, they're looking at kind of defensive coaches now and probably drafting a quarterback, right? So you need a real plan on the offensive coordinator side.
Well, Raheem Morris has been around a long time. Aaron Glenn, they're younger coaches. Glenn was a player in the league for a long time. Morris has already been a head coach and an interim head coach, for quite a while. I think he's an interesting guy that would come in and probably build off of defense that had a pretty solid year. Offense is a question, though. Who are you going to bring in to fix that? Who are you going to have develop your quarterback? Who's going to fix the offensive line? I think it's cool that Jeff Saturday is in contention. I tend to not think that's realistic, though. But hey, I didn't think they'd pull him off the streets to be the interim either. So who knows? I would stay away from. I don't want to say I'd stay away from, but I don't think Eric Bieniemy is probably going there either. Schematically not crazy different than Frank Reich, but would have developed some different trends after being with Andy Reid for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I think he wants to be a play caller too. And I just, outside of like those Shanahan guys who are just crazy meticulous, I'm not thrilled about, and maybe Andy Reid because he's just in his own world. I'm not really thrilled about hiring head coaches and having them also be play caller, because it's a lot, and it's Like if you're hiring a head coach to be a play caller, you are certain that they're bringing some innovation offensively. And not that I don't think Eric Bieniemy can do that. We are not certain that he is really adding to, like, we know Andy Reid's great, but it's just, we haven't seen, there's a level of certainty with these Shanahan guys where you can tell in like interviews, Mike McDaniel has like really, really elevated that offense in San Francisco. Bieniemy very well might be, but I don't know.
I think
there's
some of the issues that he had are with that. It's like you're taking on so much. I mean,
yeah,
and it's even different that back in the day when Andy Reid came up from Green Bay and became a head coach / play caller. The media was different even back then. You have to deal with so much more as a head coach, along with potentially calling plays. It's the game management, it's the player management, it's calling plays, it's media management, it's all the scheduling, it's everything you have to do. It's a different animal now than it used to be. It really is. So if you are coming up and calling plays and you haven't already proven that you can do that, then it's like you're learning even more on the job. You got to be really patient with that. And I just would want a guy who can prove he can manage a vast amount of different things very effectively if he's going to be learning to do that much stuff. So it's tough. I mean, I think it's pretty cool that the Giants decided not to play, that Dable decided not to call plays with them. I think it was a good move for Saleh to not call defensive plays when he came over. I think that it's an interesting thing. I mean, and I think for the most part, it is a net positive. And even if you eventually, like, say, for example, down the line, your coordinator gets hired away as a coach somewhere and you want to take over play calling after you've been in the position for a while, maybe that is more feasible. But to come in and try and do it all, that's tough. But all right. So let's move on to the coordinators so that we can get out of here pretty much on time. All right. So the Chargers, they're looking at Frank Reich, Shane Steichen. Interesting. I mean, I think either one of those would probably be a good fit, but it would depend on Frank Reich not getting a head coaching job. If that was the case, I would want to go there. I would want to go. Yeah. I would want to go be with Justin Herbert. And if I were Steichen, I probably would do the same. Like, for me, if I'm taking a lateral move and going to be OC somewhere, he's the quarterback I would want to take the chance on. So they probably kind of have their pick as long as they get along with Staley. And Gavino Borquez, managing editor for Chargers Wire, he says he wants Bryant Johnson. So that's who he think would be the best fit. So any thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, Bryant Johnson is a favorite of a lot of people's. I don't know that he's interviewed really with anyone yet. I guess the Jets he has, but yeah, I like Reich. I mean, I just think that the pieces they have there schematically fit what he's going to want to do too. And I'm not certain he's going to get a head coaching job, and I think that'd be his first choice as an OC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in Arizona, to be honest. But all right, Washington Commanders. I've got a few responses for this as well, and of course, you are a Washington fan, so. Pat Shurmur, Ken Zampese, Charles London, Eric Studesville. So Tay and Todd, they are interested in Charles London. They like the idea that he's younger. Sorry for ref the district. Got Chris's name. He's the stoner anyway, so maybe I should have just put that. But they want Brian Greasy. Man, I see. This is what happens when I'm typing too fast. Brain Greasy. Take an L on. I'll just take an L on this one in general. So thoughts on the guys that they pointed out, thoughts on any of these guys, and then who's your current favorite?
Yeah, I think it's going to end up being Pat Shurmur. I'm scared because I don't think Pat Shurmur really does much for this offense. I think it's just that Rivera's going to go with someone he knows in the past and someone who's a veteran. Zampese, I think they just interviewed in-house because they were trying to be nice. A lot of people think he's going to get the job. I don't think they're going to go with Zampese. I think they'll stick with him as a QB coach. I'm always on the same page with Tay and Todd. We agree on a lot of things. Charles London, to me, I think in the direction they want to go based on what they did in Atlanta is very intriguing to me because I think they're doing some interesting things there. And I do think this is going to be a run first, play action heavy offense. I think that works with what you want to do with Howell. And I think that's a great fit. Stutesville, I don't know much about yet. Based on what they're doing in Miami, like could be fun, but I don't really know. Charles London right now is the guy that I am kind of hoping is the direction they go in.
Just fix that just for the sake of it, so I don't have to look at that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what they want to do at quarterback will probably impact, that a little bit. Whether they want to go into the draft or whoever presents the best plan for developing a quarterback, if they want to go with the vet, that's an option as well. I mean, where they're picking, they could definitely try and draft a guy. They could move up. They could go after an Anthony Richardson, or they could just try and pay somebody in free agency to just come and be a holdover while the ownership fluctuates. You know what I mean? Because it's tough. You got to make that decision about which one you want to do probably before the sale goes through. And then the draft might actually happen after the sale goes through, potentially. And then if that's the case, then, you've got to have your owner probably involved to some degree in the draft process, because that'd be the first quarterback that they draft. So it's an interesting situation, and all of that will impact what kind of person they want to take that role.
Yeah.
All right.
Just a quick little thing on them. I think we're kind of missing. People are missing nationally, like where this team really is with the ownership thing. It's just that I think Rivera is making these decisions right now, and it's going to be that. But I just don't know that it's going to be next year. Like I think he's just kind of they're just going through the motions of getting this team to prep to play next year so that the next owner can make decisions in the next offseason.
All right. So next up, we have Green being the Jets fan. He wants Nathaniel Hackett for obvious reasons. I mean, look, I think the reality is that the Jets interview process, it involves two things. It involves information gathering on what would it be like if we could potentially get this quarterback to come be with this play caller in the veteran process. And it also involves information gathering on whatever they can from in the division, because they're interviewing guys from Bills, the Dolphins, and the Patriots along with that. So, I mean, I think, if you were to go with a guy like Hackett, you probably are genuinely looking at bringing in Aaron Rodgers. If you do go with the Greg Olsen, you are probably looking at genuinely bringing in a Derek Carr. So whoever they pick, you can probably read between the lines on that a little bit. And I wouldn't be crazy surprised if they went after Tom Brady as well. I know that's not a common thought process. I wouldn't be surprised if they do, though, because then they don't have to invest draft picks in a trade, and their roster is pretty well ready to win. So, I know he may want to be in Florida or whatever the case is, but New York is a big market as well. So I don't think that would be out of the realm of possibility. I know people aren't really talking about that, but I think at least to some degree it does make sense. Nick Caley is a guy who's been in that system in New England for quite a while. So if they decided to run that, that's what Brady has run for the majority of his career. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the Jets offensive coordinator situation?
I don't think they should hire Hackett just because they want to get Rodgers. Just like I don't pigeonhole yourself. Like I just think it's dumb. This didn't even work for Denver last time they tried it. The best name on the board for me is Joe Brady. I'm a big Joe Brady guy. Just hire the best offensive coordinator, then try and acquire the best quarterback you can. I just think it's silly to be trying to match up when you don't even know who you're actually going to get a quarterback at this point. Just get the best offensive coordinator, and I think it's Joe Brady. And I think they could bring in whoever they want. Quite frankly, it's a nice situation for any coach as long as they get a quarterback, which I think they will. So yeah, that's the direction I'd go in. And I also think that whatever quarterback they bring in, it could be long. I mean, it could be a couple years at least, but I think ultimately they are still trying to develop Zach Wilson a little bit. And there's some intrigue there as well.
I think people are not thinking about that enough, and that he is probably going to be the number 2 quarterback on the roster next year. And that's why I think Brady makes sense, because he's only going to play for a year.
Yeah.
A year. Probably not 2 years, let's be honest. So you bring him in 1 year, he plays, Zach Wilson sits, and then you see where you go from there. Anyway, that I know it sounds like a pipe dream, but the reality is I'm not really sure why not. Yep. What's the main reason why not?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that they are they're a team that could go after him for sure. And any offensive coordinator is going to want to work with him, Rodgers, just like any of the quarterbacks they're looking at. Like, I think you're going to, as long as you can get one of these guys, you're going to be able to hire any of these guys and they'll be willing to work for you. And I think Joe Brady is a good enough offensive coordinator that he should work with any of those quarterbacks for sure.
All right. So nobody answered for the Patriots either. I don't know. I'm not sure why specifically, but it does kind of seem like a foregone conclusion at this point that Bill O'Brien's probably going to come back and take that job. And then Nick Caley, guys, he's already on staff. Keenan McCardell's not really a guy I know much about, but I mean, they prefer to do things in family for a reason. There's a lot of guys go elsewhere and then end up coming back. It's a very common occurrence. Daboll did it. McDaniels did it. Both Joe Judge and Matt Patricia have done it. Other guys have done it too. So it just seems like a consistent trend for them.
Yeah, and I would expect Bill O'Brien, because of everything you just said, basically, I agree with that. I would probably prefer Mike LaFleur, but I don't think they're going to do that.
Well, he has more of the principles that they already were trying to implement last year, but actually knows how to run that system. And honestly, it would be very annoying to watch him go and be successful in New England. I'm not going to lie about that. But yeah, I mean, that it's an interesting option, but it just seems like Bill O'Brien is like it seems like the obvious choice. All right. So as far as the Titans go, you've got Tim Kelly and Bill O'Brien there as well because of the relationship with what's the name from? Because he used to be with the Texans as the linebackers coach.
Mike Vrabel.
Vrabel. And
the Patriots, yeah.
He also played with the Patriots, but I don't know if Bill O'Brien would have been there.
I think they did, because O'Brien was there for a long time.
Did they cross over?
Yeah,
maybe they did.
I think they did. I mean, I'll look it up while you talk, but
all right. So I'll look it up, and then Justin Graver at Titans Film Room. He is the producer for the Around the NFL podcast, and he has his Titans podcast as well. And he said Todd Monken if he's in consideration, and I think that's an interesting one. Some of the people talking about the Jets, they're also interested in Todd Monken if he's willing to come over. After what he's done in college. So I like the idea of bringing a college OC to the NFL to be an OC because things are different, but like you're not taking on this crazy amount of responsibility that you didn't have before. There are different responsibilities. You have more media interviews and that kind of stuff, but you still have the head coach who kind of buffers a lot of that. So that's something that I'd be interested in, whether it be for the Jets or for the Titans. So I like that choice. So what are your thoughts on the Titans so far?
Yeah, I mean, the Tim Kelly thing, I don't know much about him, but seems like to be the favorite in their case. By the way, Bill O'Brien did overlap a couple years with Mike Vrabel at the end of both their times with the Patriots early in the late 2000s. I mean, if O'Brien's willing, I mean, that's interesting. That'd be a change in schematics for them. I don't know how much the plan going forward is actually Malik Willis. I feel like that was more of a GM decision, and I don't know how in Vrabel is on it based on the fact that he got effectively benched in these last couple of games for Josh Dobbs. I'm not thrilled by either of these names. Now, maybe Tim Kelly is more qualified than I think he is, but I don't know. I think that they are a team that we're still kind of waiting on what direction they're really going to go in.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, we'll see. They have time. They can figure it out. A lot of these hires won't really necessarily fall through until some of the head coaching stuff is done because some of these guys are still hoping for head coaching opportunities potentially as well. But that takes us to the Atlanta Falcons. So Falcons have interviewed Vic Fangio, Jerry Gray, or they are supposed to interview Jerry Gray. Brian Flores is a guy as well. So Scott Karasik, he is a writer for Falcons Wire. He also does a lot of draft content, specifically for the Falcons in particular. And he said Vic Fangio. I mean, to me, it's like if you can get Fangio to come in and be your DC, that's also an obvious one too. At least in my opinion, schematically, they can run a system with some of the same kind of players, even if the system itself is different. Similar fronts. But what are your thoughts on the Falcons?
Yeah, Flores also is a similar front type guy. They both run like 3-4. Flores will be more man coverage. Fangio will be more like the off cover 4 stuff that we see. I think either's a good hire. Could work for them. They think they're both can be top 5 defense coordinators, quite frankly. I think Fangio maybe is a little more proven, but Flores is just a good guy to have in your building. But I think both are really good options, and I think they're probably going to hire one of them, and they'll be in a good spot regardless.
Yeah. I think either one is good. And then ultimately the Browns, they hired Jim Schwartz yesterday, which I don't know. He's a interesting guy. I mean, systematically, it's actually closer to what they were trying to do, I think. So they're not really changing personnel that much.
Yeah. I like Jim Schwartz. I think this is a play to Myles Garrett. Like, I think they're trying to help him out. This is our blitz happy coordinator, and we might see some high production from Garrett because of it, probably.
Well, he's one of the guys that's doing the wide 9 stuff too.
Uh-huh.
So when they brought in Joe Barry is his name, right? Or Joe Woods?
It might have been Joe Woods. I think Joe Barry's
Woods.
Green Bay.
Yeah. So, yeah. So Joe Woods, he also runs the similar front coming over from the 49ers, which they picked up from, I want to say Chris Kasurik. Was it Chris Kasurik coming over from the Eagles? So they brought that. Saleh brought over Kasurik, I think. Let me just double check myself on this. It's either Chris Kasurik or Chris Richard. And I forget. All right, hold on. So, I'm mixing up coaches' names here. Joe Woods, Joe Barry. So Joe Barry runs more of a Fangio style defense, and Joe Woods was supposed to bring over this attacking front, even front defense from the 49ers. But that comes from, like, that is a blend of what Saleh was doing with some of the cover 3 stuff that he picked up in Seattle, and then this attacking front that he got when he brought over the defensive line coach from the Eagles. And I want to say it's Chris Kasurik. And so they are bringing in the guy who was kind of made that popular in the NFL, I believe. So there is a link there. Defensively on the back end, it's a little different. But, I mean, you know, that's basically what this relationship is, I think. So they're not changing too much. They just want to be more effective, I guess. Does that make sense to you?
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. And they have some pretty good players. They just had bad production for them, and I think they can be fixed, certainly. They probably need to reinvest at edge and really on the D-line a little more, but there's enough secondary pieces here to play way better than they did this season for sure.
I want to just double check this. Make sure I'm not.
I want to say...
Yeah, Chris Kasurik is the defensive line coach for the 49ers. And they brought him over, I believe, from the Eagles. Let me see. Chris Kasurik. He was not Eagles, excuse me. He was a defensive line coach with the Lions from 2010 through 2017. So while Jim Schwartz was there. Then he was with the Dolphins for 1 year before he ended up with the 49ers. So Jim Schwartz was with the Eagles after his Lions run. So that's where the crossover is. But yeah. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead and let's put a wrap on this.
We don't have the Bucks and Rams up here, but those are two other teams who are looking for offensive coordinators. The Bucks just announced that they fired Leftwich. I have no idea what direction they'll go in. That might be the toughest one to line up, just because I don't know who the quarterback's going to be. They had so many issues schematically. I don't know what Todd Bowles wants to do. If he thinks the problem is actually scheme or just the person, I don't know. They could go and hire someone else who's way behind in terms of play style and the way they do things. I'm not super confident that they know what they're doing. And then the Rams, I think are going to end up with Mike LaFleur. I think he's going to be the team that ends up. He's going to be the guy that ends up. They're going to end up being the team that gets him to go to them just because of the connection with McVay.
So they didn't have an offensive coordinator this past season?
They had. I don't remember what his name was, but he was working at Kentucky the year before, and he's gone back to Kentucky.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize. Yeah, that's right. I actually forgot about that because Kevin O'Connell was there, and then after he went, that's right. Okay, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Knowing that Sean McVay stays, obviously he's the play caller.
Liam Cohen.
Yeah, that's
Cohen.
right.
I don't know.
I totally forgot about that, so that's why I didn't include it because I just wasn't sure what they were looking for. But all right, so that's going to do it for our coaching cycle recap and our post-mortem for the wildcard teams. Nick, thanks for going through this with me. A lot to talk about, a lot of information, and we'll be back next week to talk a little bit more on Thursday with some of our team building and some of our deeper investigations into putting together an NFL roster, and we'll definitely revisit some coaching hires because I'm sure some of them will be made by then.
Yeah.
And then we should be hitting the Senior Bowl in a couple of weeks too, so I'm excited for that. That should be after the conference championship round. So it's coming up pretty darn quick. Let everybody know where they can find you, and we will be back soon.
Nicholas Sports on Twitter. For now, that's kind of it. Just here on Mondays and Thursdays, and we're really getting excited for the Senior Bowl stuff. That should be a great week for us to kind of crank out some different content and fun stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks to Noah Ashley, our producer. As always, we'll be back specifically this Saturday with Brison, Owens, and Kyle Nishida to pick the divisional round games. Then you and I will be back with Kyron Samuels on Monday to recap the divisional round games, and then we're only a week away. All right. Appreciate you all for listening. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Defiant Takes Football. You can find us on Twitter at Defiant Takes, as well as all other social media outlets. Find me on Twitter at TheMaxDean. Noah Ashley is at No Ashtray Sports. And that being said, we will see you this Saturday.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.